The fluorescent lights above the prison hallway flickered with a weary pulse, casting long, trembling shadows across the cracked concrete. Every sound echoed, the distant clang of metal doors, the murmurs of women who had long forgotten what silence felt like, the steady, measured footsteps of guards who didn't need to raise their voices to remind you who held the power. In that suffocating grayness, Luna Nozawa walked alone, the fabric of her orange jumpsuit rustling faintly against her knees. The once vibrant designer who had graced magazine covers now moved like a ghost, her beauty reduced to something dangerous, the kind that could draw envy or violence in equal measure. She had thought prison would be a pause, a purgatory before the world remembered that she was human. But inside these walls, innocence was just another currency. Luna quickly learned that her trial hadn't ended when the judge's gavel fell. It had only changed venues. Out there, she had been a headline, heiress turned criminal. In here, she was a bargaining chip in a game she couldn't yet see the edges of. The guards called her quiet, the inmates called her the pretty one. But to those who truly understood the system, the ones who ran it from the shadows, Luna was something else entirely: leverage. It began subtly. A note slipped under her food tray. A voice in the laundry room sang her name when she hadn't spoken to anyone in days. The message was always the same: they can protect you. At first, she ignored it. She told herself that survival meant invisibility, that keeping her head down was her best weapon. But one night, when she awoke to the sound of two women fighting just 3 cells away, when she saw blood spill freely and no guard bothered to intervene, she realized invisibility was another word for vulnerability. The next morning, she replied. The meeting was arranged under the guise of a routine medical checkup. A guard escorted her to the infirmary, where a woman waited, middle-aged, elegantly dressed, out of place in a place like this. Her name was Veronica Hale, a lawyer with sharp eyes and an even sharper smile. "You've made quite the impression," Veronica said, sitting gracefully at the table. "There are people outside who believe you don't deserve to rot in here. They want to help." Luna looked at her, wary. "People who just give away help don't exist," she said softly. Veronica smiled. "No, they don't. Which is why they're not giving anything away. They're offering an exchange." She slid a file across the table. Inside were clippings, old articles about the Forrester family, business mergers, charity events, obituaries. But what caught Luna's eye was a photo: Ridge Forrester, standing at a memorial for Stephanie Douglas Forrester, his expression solemn, unreadable. "What does this have to do with me?" Luna asked. Veronica leaned forward. "Ridge Forrester is a man with power, legacy, and skeletons buried deep enough to fill a graveyard. Years ago, his wife, Stephanie, died under circumstances that don't add up. There are whispers, quiet, persistent, that her death wasn't natural. That Ridge covered it up to protect himself from a scandal involving Quinn Fuller." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We want you to give those whispers a voice." Luna's pulse quickened. "You want me to lie," she said flatly. Veronica didn't flinch. "We want you to survive. You do this, and we'll make sure your record disappears. You'll be out before the year ends. You'll have your life back." Luna pushed the file away. "And if I refuse?" Veronica's smile didn't falter. "Then you'll learn how quickly an accident can happen in here. A broken jaw, a missing file, a suicide note that no one questions." She stood, gathering her papers. "Think about it. You're smart, Luna. Smart enough to know that truth doesn't save people, it destroys them." For the first time in weeks, Luna felt the cold bite of fear. She returned to her cell, staring through the bars as the night deepened. Stephanie Forrester's face lingered in her mind, not as a victim, but as a symbol of everything this world had taken from women like them: their voices, their dignity, their agency. She thought of Bill Spencer, of the Spencers' arrogance, of how easily they had thrown her to the wolves when her usefulness ended. Maybe the world didn't deserve the truth. Maybe it only respected power and the ability to wield it. But something inside her resisted. She couldn't bear to become another manipulator, another liar twisting the lives of people who'd already drowned in deceit. Yet she couldn't ignore the weight of survival pressing down on her lungs. Each day brought new reminders, a stolen meal, a bruised shoulder, the mocking laughter of inmates who knew she was being watched. The walls whispered that no one came out clean. Unbeknownst to Luna, someone was watching, not from the shadows of the prison, but from beyond its walls. Deacon Sharp had heard rumors through old contacts, whispers that Luna's imprisonment was part of a much larger game, one tied to names that made even powerful men tremble. He had his own guilt where Luna was concerned. He had once turned a blind eye when Bill manipulated her case. Now, with Sheila gone and his own life reduced to fragments, Deacon saw helping Luna as a way to atone. He began quietly hiring investigators, gathering files, pulling at threads that led back to Veronica Hale and the shadowy consortium she represented, men in suits who played puppet master with the justice system. Inside, Luna began receiving messages she couldn't explain, tiny acts of mercy. Her missing mail suddenly reappeared. A hostile cellmate was transferred. Once, she found a small photograph slipped under her pillow, a picture of her standing in front of her boutique, taken years ago. On the back, scrawled in careful handwriting, were 3 words, "Don't give in." She didn't know who sent it, but it became her talisman. As weeks turned into months, pressure from Veronica's clients mounted. Luna was summoned again, this time not to the infirmary, but to a private visitation room. Veronica arrived flanked by 2 men in tailored suits. One of them introduced himself as Charles Denner, a name Luna recognized from whispered rumors in fashion and business circles. He was known for his ruthless acquisitions, his quiet ties to organized crime, his dinners with Bill Spencer. "We can make this very simple," Denner said. "You give us a statement. You say Ridge Forrester approached you years ago with documents implicating him in Stephanie's death. We handle the rest. In exchange, you walk free." Luna's hands trembled. "You're asking me to destroy a man's life." Denner smiled thinly. "I'm asking you to save your own." When they left her alone, Luna sat motionless for what felt like hours. She thought about Ridge, the charming designer with the tragic smile, the man who built an empire of beauty atop graves of secrets. She thought about Stephanie, the matriarch who had ruled her family with both love and iron. And she thought about Quinn, the woman who had once captivated Ridge and shattered his world. The story Veronica wanted her to tell wasn't entirely implausible. That was what made it so dangerous. The night she was meant to sign the fabricated statement, the prison went into lockdown. The power flickered, alarms blared, guards shouted commands down the corridors. Luna huddled in her cell, heart racing. When the lights returned, she noticed something on her cot, a folded envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a note that said, "The truth is your only weapon." There was no signature. Over the following days, Luna waited for another opportunity to use the prison computer lab, officially meant for inmate education, unofficially for those who knew how to bypass restrictions. She connected the drive and opened its contents. What she found nearly stopped her heart. It was surveillance footage, grainy, time-stamped, from a private hospital room dated the night of Stephanie Forrester's death. The video showed Ridge entering the room late at night, pacing beside her bed, holding her hand. Then, after a long pause, he kissed her forehead and walked out. Moments later, a nurse entered and adjusted Stephanie's medication drip. 10 minutes after that, the monitors flatlined. There was no evidence that Ridge had tampered with anything. But what the video did show was the nurse, later identified as someone who had worked under one of Denner's companies. The implication was clear. Stephanie's death may have been orchestrated, but Ridge hadn't been the killer. Someone else had rewritten the story long ago. Luna stared at the screen, trembling. The network had chosen Ridge as their scapegoat because his downfall would ripple through industries, destabilize fortunes, erase competitors. She realized she wasn't just a pawn in revenge, she was the trigger for a corporate coup. From that moment, her fear turned into resolve. Luna began quietly gathering allies, a sympathetic guard, a journalist who'd once covered her fashion shows, even a former Forrester employee doing time for embezzlement. Piece by piece, she constructed her own countergame. Every night, she wrote down details she remembered from her encounters with Veronica and Denner, every veiled threat, every name dropped in passing. The evidence she collected was dangerous, too dangerous to keep inside. She needed to get it out. Deacon became her unseen messenger. Through coded phone calls and smuggled letters, he worked to expose Denner's organization. He reached out to Ridge's son, Thomas, warning him that someone was planning to resurrect the ghosts of the past. Thomas, torn between loyalty and suspicion, began his own investigation, one that led him to an old contact of his mother's, Quinn Fuller. When Quinn learned Ridge's name was being tied to Stephanie's death, she went silent for a long moment before saying, "If they're dragging me into this, it means they're desperate. Desperate people make mistakes." As pressure mounted, Luna's health began to decline. Sleep became elusive. Nightmares of betrayal haunted her. Yet even in her weakest moments, she refused to sign. Veronica grew impatient. "This is your last chance," she warned. "Do you want to die in here?" Luna met her gaze, something fierce burning in her eyes. "I'd rather die telling the truth than live as your puppet." The next night, her cell was raided. Guards tore through her belongings, searching for the USB drive, but Luna had already sent it out, hidden inside a box of donated prison art supplies scheduled for pickup. The footage found its way to Deacon, and from him, to Thomas and Quinn. Within days, the video surfaced anonymously online. The reaction was explosive. The media frenzy turned on its head. Instead of headlines condemning Ridge Forrester, questions arose about the involvement of Denner's companies in Stephanie's medical care. Old corporate records resurfaced, linking Denner's operations to Bill Spencer's offshore ventures. It became clear that what had begun as an attempt to frame Ridge had now exposed a network of corruption stretching across Los Angeles's most powerful families. Back in prison, Luna was moved to solitary for her protection. She didn't know how much of the story had reached the outside, but she sensed the shift. Guards avoided her. Inmates whispered her name with newfound respect or fear. She had become both hero and target, a paradox the world didn't know how to handle. When Veronica Hale visited her one last time, her polished calm had cracked. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "Do you have any idea who you've angered?" Luna smiled faintly, her eyes steady. The kind of people who mistake silence for obedience. Weeks later, her case was reopened. Deacon testified on her behalf, revealing how the network had manipulated the justice system. Quinn provided records proving that Denner's companies had handled Stephanie's private care under false credentials. Even Ridge, humbled, shaken, stood before reporters and said, "The truth has a way of surviving even when everything else falls apart." When Luna finally walked out of prison, the sun felt unreal on her skin. Reporters shouted her name, calling her both a survivor and a conspirator. She didn't correct them. She had learned that redemption wasn't about being seen as innocent. It was about reclaiming power over your story. Months later, she sat in a quiet cafe overlooking the ocean. Deacon joined her, placing a file on the table, documents proving that Denner's empire was collapsing, that Veronica had fled the country, that Bill's allies were scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. "You did it," Deacon said softly. "You turned their game against them." Luna looked out at the horizon, her reflection flickering in the glass. "No," she said. "I just stopped playing by their rules." Somewhere far away, the Forrester mansion stood silent, its portraits watching over the generations like ghosts that never left. Ridge visited Stephanie's memorial one last time, whispering words the wind carried away. "I'm sorry for everything." And in that fragile peace, between guilt and survival, between truth and manipulation, Luna Nozawa finally became what the world never allowed her to be. Not a villain, not a victim, but something far more dangerous, a woman who had learned how to weaponize her own redemption.